What's the biggest objection to having a tax-free retirement? That's the subject of today's video. Hey folks, this is your host, best-selling author David McKnight. In today's video, we're going to talk about the biggest objection I run into when talking about a tax-free retirement. The single largest objection that I see week in and week out is simply this: I don't want to pay the taxes on my Roth conversion. All right, let's break this one down. When someone says they don't want to pay the tax on their Roth conversion, they're essentially saying two things at the same time. First, they're saying they don't want to preemptively pay a tax before the IRS absolutely requires it of them. It's just too painful. They would prefer to postpone the payment of that tax until a point sometime in the future when they can either choose to take it out to pay for lifestyle expenses in retirement. This is about 80% of the people. Or they're forced to take it out at age 72 through required minimum distributions. This is the other 20% of the people. In other words, when it comes to paying a tax to the IRS, some people would simply prefer to kick the can down the road. They just can't bring themselves to pay the tax before the IRS absolutely requires it of them. And the second thing they're saying, either explicitly or implicitly, is that they think their tax rate down the road will, in fact, be lower than it is today. This is perhaps the much larger concern. Now, if you're currently in the 32, 35, or 37% tax bracket, I get it. If I were in your shoes, I would feel exactly the same way. You may not, in fact, be in a higher tax bracket down the road, particularly if you're planning on spending much less than what you're currently making today. No beef with you there. In fact, I made precisely this point in a podcast episode about a month ago entitled, "Should High-Income Earners Do Roth Conversions?" I've linked to it in the description below. However, if you're currently in the 22 or 24% tax brackets, meaning your taxable income is between $83,550 and $340,100, I think you're missing out on a good deal of historic proportions. I think that 10 years from now, when our country's financial chickens come home to roost and tax rates have to rise dramatically or possibly even double to keep our ship of state afloat, I believe you will look back at the 22 and 24% tax brackets as good deals of historic proportions. You'll say to yourself, why didn't I take advantage of tax rates while they were historically low? This is particularly the case because today's 24% tax bracket is still lower than the future equivalent of the 22% tax bracket, which is 25% starting in 2026. So why not convert up to the top of the 24% tax bracket at $340,100? Your future post-2026 self will thank you for it. So, even after explaining all of this, some people are still reluctant to pay the cost of admission to the tax-free bucket. They're reluctant to pay that tax on their Roth conversion. And in my experience, it really comes down to this. They're just not convinced that we're actually in a rising tax rate environment. They're not convinced that tax rates in the future are likely to be higher than they are today. This is the single greatest roadblock in getting you to the 0% tax bracket in retirement. So, if you find yourself a little weak-kneed when it comes to paying that tax on your Roth conversion, might I make a suggestion? Educate yourself on what the independent third-party experts have to say about the future of tax rates. There are a couple of different ways you can do this. First, read chapter 1 of my best-selling book, The Power of Zero. It's called The Gathering Storm. In it, I go over the history of tax rates and demonstrate that historically, tax rates have been substantially higher than they are today. Marginal tax rates post-World War II were 94%, and marginal tax rates in the 70s were 70%. The highest marginal tax rate today, by comparison, is 37%. That's rock bottom, folks, and as our ship of state slowly founders, those rates have nowhere to go but up. Second, watch my documentary, The Power of Zero, The Tax Train is Coming. That's also linked in the description below. Throughout 2018, filmmaker Doug Orchard and I crisscrossed the country interviewing all the most important experts in the country on the national debt as it relates to the future of tax rates. We interviewed former Secretary of State George Shultz, one of the brightest economists in the world, Dr. Larry Kolikoff, one of the foremost experts in the world on quantifying the true costs of the national debt, heads of think tanks, and chairs of economic departments all across academia. And you know what? They're all reading the same music and they're singing the same song. They're simply saying that if we don't change course immediately, that 10 years from now, tax rates will have to rise dramatically or we go broke as a nation. Some of them even use the D word as it relates to the future of tax rates. That's right, tax rates will have to double or we go broke as a nation. I recently wrote an article in MarketWatch where I observed that Ray Dalio, Leon Cooperman, Ed Slott, Larry Kotlikoff, and Larry Swedroe all believe that tax rates are going up in the next 10 years. Here's what they had to say about it. Ray Dalio, chief investment officer for one of the largest hedge funds in the world, said, quote, "The U.S. will have little choice but to raise taxes in the coming years to offset its mounting liabilities and debt. In many ways, we are looking at a currency problem, not just a debt problem." Close quote. Leon Cooperman, billionaire hedge fund manager and chairman and CEO of Omega Advisors, believes that, quote, "Regardless of who controls the levers of powers in Washington, taxes are on the way up, and the coming tax revamp is going to change capitalism forever. The only variable is how high and how fast tax rates will go up," close quote. Ed Slott, America's CPA, believes that, quote, "There is a good chance that tax rates will go up before 2026, close quote. Dr. Larry Kotlikoff said, quote, "The cost of converting a portion of your stock market portfolio will be lower today than at any other point in your lifetime," close quote. Larry Swedroe, chief research officer for Buckingham Strategic Wealth, said, quote, "Regardless of which party is in power, we are likely to see a significant increase in taxes before 2026, close quote. The fact is, it's not just the economists that are coming over into my camp. It's the financial gurus who have historically held these notions in derision. One such guru wrote a scathing critique of the power of zero back in 2015 because of my insistence on doing Roth conversions before tax rates go up for good. Well, just recently he admitted in a Twitter post that if certain proposed tax legislation got enacted, he would convert his entire IRA all in 1 year. Not only did he concede that he'd be willing to do a Roth conversion, but he admitted that he was so concerned about an immediate rise in taxes that he'd be willing to do it all in 1 year, something I rarely, if ever, recommend myself. The fact is, there are very few experts left who believe that Roth conversions are not a good idea for Americans in the middle income tax brackets. Why? Because it's clear we're at historically low tax rates, and this tax sale can't last forever, particularly in the face of dramatically unfunded obligations like Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and interest on the national debt. In summary, there's only one real objection to taking the steps necessary to get to the 0% tax bracket in retirement. It's a disbelief in the reality of higher tax rates. This prevents people from preemptively paying a tax at today's historically low tax rates before the IRS requires it of them some point down the road. But let me ask you a question. Wouldn't you rather pay taxes today on your own terms than postpone the payment of those taxes until the IRS forces you to pay it on their terms? If you're still a bit hesitant, take a look at the cumulative testimony of experts that know much more about this stuff than you and me before the tax sale of a lifetime is gone for good. Do what it takes to get to the 0% tax bracket. Why? Because if tax rates double, 2 times 0 is still 0. If you need some help navigating these types of strategies, head on over to davidmcknight.com and opt in for a complimentary strategy session. I'm happy to give you a hand. Don't forget to click like, subscribe, and the bell so you never miss a video. And feel free to make comments or ask questions in the comment section below. This is David McKnight. I look forward to seeing you on the next video.